The verdict is officially in the case of Sean Diddy Combs. And wow, I mean, this is making headlines by the minute. In fact, just moments ago, his bail was denied. And this was after the astonishing verdict. And in many cases, it's very stunning what happened. But I want to unpack what this verdict means, not just for Puff, but also for hip hop moving forward. Let's get into it. So, after 7 weeks, in the case of USA versus Sean Diddy Combs, Puffy was found not guilty on the more severe RICO charges. So that was racketeering conspiracy. Basically, what the Fed said was running a criminal enterprise. He was also found not guilty of sex trafficking, and this is in relation to Cassie Ventura as well as the Jane Doe. And then he was found guilty of 2 counts specifically related to transportation for the purposes of prostitution. So when you look at all of these charges and where he was convicted, by and large, this is a huge win for Puff as well as the defense team, because this is kind of the best that they could really hope for. So what happened today after the verdict was announced? Puffy and his team wanted him to get bail while sentencing was being discussed, but the judge came back this evening in New York and denied it, based upon a variety of factors, but essentially stating that Puffy could be a threat to the public. And in fact, individuals such as Cassie, Deontay, one of Puffy's former assistants, like they all came forward and did write letters stating that Puffy being on bail would not be a good thing, especially for them, which is understandable. So the judge denied his bail. So now we know we're just going to await sentencing. I'm not a legal expert, so, everyone has sort of different theories about this, but as somebody who followed this case really closely, in many ways, I'm not very surprised. I think that when you looked at the testimony that was presented, the evidence that was presented, and, you're arguing in front of a jury of your peers, getting a unanimous verdict of, completely guilty, completely innocent, I really think the jury had it a lot cut out for them. And it just seems like they were just unable to find him guilty on the more serious charges. You have to remember, in a criminal case, the burden of proof is very high. It really is showing that there's a 99% chance that he did all of these things. I mean, he was looking at life sentences. And for someone of his age, I believe he's like, 55 going on 56, like these are very significant sentences. He would have spent the rest of his natural life behind bars. So I could see where the jury, after, hearing all the testimony, watching some of those freak off tapes, like how they came to this conclusion, in many ways, it doesn't surprise me, but it also just does surprise me, right? You never know with a jury. But I'm not here to discuss, the legal analysis. I'm sure some of the jurors will come forward and probably give us some insights of what happened in the courtroom, what happened in the jury deliberation room. But to me, what's more interesting, especially as a hip hop journalist and someone who comes from this world, what does this mean for Puffy? And what does this mean for hip hop moving forward? Puffy is one of the most successful rap moguls of all times. When it comes to his net worth, which at one point was $1 billion, and his influence, not just in music, but fashion, lifestyle, spirits, TV, film, he was one of those moguls who truly touched all aspects of entertainment as well as pop culture. No matter what happens with the sentencing, whether it's a very light sentence or whether it is something more severe, I just feel like his legacy has been tarnished, and this is something that you can't really come back from. Do I see brands wanting to work with him? No. I mean, even though he was acquitted of the more serious charges, I just feel like, between freak offs and baby oil and all of these things, like I just can't see a brand wanting to do business with him. What is going to be his music career? If anything, maybe he does release music independently. I know this son, like Christian Combs, wants to be an artist, so maybe he focuses on that. But it'll be very interesting to see who in the music industry, continues to align with him. A few people have come forward, people like Ray J, I think even Funkmaster Flex put out a statement where they're like, look, like I never saw that side of him, and maybe you'd keep working with him. Like, I don't know. But I do think that certain other people are just probably never going to want to, work with him, take a photo, be in the same room. So I think that's going to be interesting. But I think when it comes to his music career, fashion, just these other aspects of culture, I just think that his runway there, personally, I don't see how he recovers from it. But I would love to know what you think. I mean, are we just sort of in this era where people want a comeback story, or is this just, a bridge too far and we can't come back from it? I think that's where we are with Puff, honestly. The other part that I think is really interesting is what this means for hip hop as a whole. Not too long ago, I was interviewed. It was for CNN, and they asked me, is this going to be part of a larger hip hop reckoning, this sort of Me Too moment, this watershed moment? And I said, it really depends what happens with this case. I do think that there will be individuals, especially powerful individuals, who might think twice, not just how they deal with the people that they're in a romantic relationship with, but also their staff, their assistants, people who work for them. So in that case, I think that's a good thing if, people are acting more professionally and they understand which lines that shouldn't be crossed. But I also don't know. I mean, I can say honestly, talking to a lot of people in the music industry, people who know Puff, love him, hate him, by and large, I mean, a lot of people felt like this case was more about policing his personal life, and they don't see that things are going to change from a larger perspective, specifically things like domestic violence, how women are treated, how people who may be in subordinate positions are treated. And to me, that's kind of sad because if anything, that's what should be the takeaway, right? Like, yes, he might have gotten acquitted on the more serious charges, but it's very clear that the environment that he created, the people in his life, whether it's romantic or people who worked for Puff, it was at the very least, unhealthy environment. It was unprofessional. And that's not how a leader should be. Like, as somebody who's supposed to be the boss, you set the tone. And I would love to see other executives and artists and people in power taking that responsibility seriously. You want to create an environment that people feel comfortable, that there isn't this sort of culture of secrecy. I mean, I understand the need for discretion, but, there were so many assistants and people who worked for him coming on that stand, and according to them, it really felt like they didn't know where to go and where to find that support. When it comes to someone like Cassie specifically, I think for her to speak publicly, for her story to be, put out there, and for her to do it, I can only hope it gives her some solace. What she chooses to do next is really up to her. And hopefully for her, this starts an era of healing. And same for everybody else, right? Again, regardless of the verdict, I just hope that everyone involved, directly or indirectly, this just starts a chapter for them where they can just focus on themselves and their healing. Because I think it's a lot. Like, we think of this as the verdict. So many media outlets have been covering this for 30 something days. And once he's sentenced, it's like on to the next. But for a lot of people, this was their real life. And this has repercussions on their relationships, their professional relationships. So I think it's going to be a long journey of, just healing and hopefully introspection and, ideally coming out on the other end. And, one thing about Puff, he definitely is a survivor. He'll be, fine, I think, by and large, financially. Although, there are a lot of civil cases outstanding civil cases, and the burden of proof in a civil case is much lower than criminal. And also in a civil case, from what I can understand, and if anyone's a lawyer and I'm saying the wrong thing, please let me know in the comments. But I also believe in a civil case, he can be deposed. So, in this criminal case, he chose not to take the stand. In fact, the defense didn't call any witnesses, and that was their strategy, which worked for them. But I believe in a civil case, he may have to actually be deposed. They may ask him very pointed personal questions. So I don't see this road ending for him either. We don't know. He may get, a very short sentence. He might get time served. He's been behind bars, I believe, for about like 9 or 10 months so far. So he may get that time served, good behavior, whatever. I don't know. But even as a free man, I don't think he's free from all of this. Like, I think this continues to follow him, whether it be, within a legal setting, a business setting, or a personal setting. I really think this is going to impact his career, his legacy, his life. And, as I think about it, it's just incredibly sad, right? Like, imagine being so famous and rich and successful and truly somebody who was a hip hop icon, and this is how your legacy ends. And it's just something to kind of think about, right? As we look at celebrities, as we look at people who are incredibly wealthy or in places of power, with that, I believe comes responsibility and, acting in a certain way and treating people in a certain way. But, people also make their choices. And personally, I think when it comes to Puff, his reputation has, really been marred in a way that I can't see him recovering. But I would love to know your thoughts. I mean, how are you feeling after this verdict against Puffy? Were you surprised by the verdict? Was this something that you felt that he should have been, guilty when it came to those other counts, specifically RICO and sex trafficking? Do you feel like this should have even been a case? Like, do you think that the government had a strong case? I would just love to know what your thoughts are. What do you think the sentencing is going to be? And most importantly, what's next for him? And how do you think this is going to affect hip hop? Let me know in the comments.